Okay, here we go. We'll start with problem 11.3 in lesson 1.11. And Kieran started reflecting triangles CDE across line M. So far, he knows the image of D is D prime, and the image of E is E prime. Down here, the question says, we want to annotate the diagram to show how he reflected point D. Well, here's how we know how to reflect a point. The first thing we're going to have to do is we are going to connect with a segment. We are going to connect point D with its image D prime. Then what we're going to do is we're going to find the intersection of that segment with our line of reflection. Whoop, let's undo that. Let's put a point in there. So we want to find the intersection of our segment with the line of reflection. There it is. And what I want you to recognize is that this line of reflection is the perpendicular bisector of the segment that connects our pre-image point, D, with our image, D prime. Okay, and since it's the perpendicular bisector, I know it's going to be the same distance from our intersection point here to point D as it is from the intersection to the image D prime. Okay, and to prove that, if I draw a circle centered at this intersection going through point D, notice that it goes through point D prime as well. And I made that dotted just so we can see that this intersection with our perpendicular line that's bisecting our segment is in fact the perpendicular bisector. So if that's the case, if we want to figure out where is point C, all we have to do is draw a perpendicular line that goes through C that's perpendicular to M, okay, and make sure then that we have the perpendicular bisector by drawing a circle. So we're going to undo this so it's not quite so cluttered. And the first thing we're going to do is we have to draw a circle centered at C that intersects segment M. Let me undo that. Centered at C that intersects segment line M in two spots. There's one spot. Here's our other spot. Now if we draw a perpendicular bisector of these 2 points, I know it should go through C. So how do we draw a perpendicular bisector? So first we got to draw a circle centered at the top point that goes through the bottom, centered at the bottom point that goes through the top, and then connect those. So now we're going to get our line tool and we are going to connect these points. Okay, so what I've done is I've made a line segment, or I made a line that's perpendicular to M that goes through C. Now what I want to do is I want to hide some of these circles so that we're not quite so confused. I'm going to hide the points as well. There we go. Now they're gone. So I know that this blue line is perpendicular to line M. Now all I have to do is find the intersection, and I know that that is going to be the center of my circle. Draw a circle with a radius that goes, make sure that my circle goes through point C. Find the other intersection on this side, and now I know this point over here is definitely point J is definitely going to be the image of point C. Okay, so I'm going to take point J away because that should actually be point C prime. Okay, But if I put a point in there, now I can use the polygon tool and I can connect these 3 points. And I have triangle on the bottom down here. I have triangle E prime, D prime, C prime. Okay, this point up here is C prime, and that is going to be an exact image, a reflection of EDC. So really, the whole idea is that I know that the line of reflection has to be the perpendicular bisector that connects the segment that connects the point with its reflected image. To go back to our OneNote, what I did is I took that screenshot, I pasted it into my OneNote notebook, and I annotate this diagram, okay? And we know that this point C prime is now the reflection of point C, okay? So we're going to answer number 3 here. And number 3 says to write a set of instructions for how to reflect any point P across a given line L. So I'm going to start with a line L and a point P. And if I want to reflect point P across line L, the first thing I'm going to do, step 1, is to create a line perpendicular to L that passes through P. That's step 1. Step 2 is once I have that, so if I do a line perpendicular to L that goes through C, okay. Step 2, and I'll make step 2 in green. Step 2 is to create a circle at the intersection of those 2 lines that goes through P. So I will call the intersection of these 2 lines, I'll call it point M. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to create a circle centered at M that has a radius MP. Okay, so if I have a circle, and I'm just going to sketch it in here, it's not going to be the best, but you'll get the idea. If I have this circle centered at M, if the radius is MP, that means that this circle down here on the other side of my line L has to pass through the same distance away. It has to pass through that perpendicular the same distance away. So M is now the midpoint of segment PQ. Okay, M is the midpoint of segment PQ. So I'm going to create a circle at the intersection of these 2 lines that goes through P. And then my last step, step 3, find the other intersection of circle M and that perpendicular line. and we called that point Q. Okay, so what we've just done here now is I know that Q is the image of P. So better than calling it Q, we should call that P prime. Okay, so we'll call this P prime because it's the image of P. So now P prime is the image of P.